Welcome to Mothership Open Secrets, and thank you so much for joining us this Saturday instead of sleeping in. Today we have with us three Singaporeans, Yee Jenn Jong, Sonny Liew, and Remy Choo to have a roundtable discussion on how young Singaporeans can contribute more actively and meaningfully to the political process. I'm Tanya, and I'll be the moderator for today's session. Later on, the panelists will also be taking questions from the audience, so please feel free to leave your questions for them in the comment section of this video. If your question is selected, you actually stand a chance to win a signed copy of Jenn Jong's new book titled Journey in Blue. So these books are courtesy of Jenn Jong himself and World Scientific Singapore. We have several copies to give away today, so please join in, send us your questions. Now, quickly and very briefly introduce our three panelists for today. Sonny Liew, our first panelist, is an award-winning artist and illustrator, the brains behind the multi-Eisner-winning Art of Charlie Chan Hock Chai, which I'm sure many of you are very familiar with. Our second panelist, Yee Jenn Jong, is a former NCMP. Under the Workers' Party, he contested in Juche SMC in 2011 and in Marine Parade GRC in 2015 and 2020. Our third panelist, Choo Cheng-si, he's a lawyer and activist known for taking up controversial cases such as defending activists accused of sedition. He's also one of the lawyers asking the Court of Appeal to declare Section 3778 unconstitutional. Okay, I think I've done enough talking for now, so I'll let the three panelists tell us a little bit more about their political awakening, what moved their spirit to begin their political journey, and how they've been contributing since then. So maybe we can start with Sonny first.
Oh, thanks, Tanya. Thanks for having me here on this panel. I guess my awakening, if I call it that, was actually encountering a book called No Man is an Island by James Minchin. I think I read that when I was 17, 18, and it was like a different perspective on Lee Kuan Yew that I had not seen before. And I think that was the first time I got a sense that there were different narratives and different histories out there. And not so long after, I did my first comic, Frankie and Pooh, for the new paper, and that was sort of my very early expression of ideas and thoughts about Singapore. It was about these two characters who were living in Singapore. It was like a Frankenstein character exploring political, social issues here. And once I did that, I became interested in comics, and so I spent the next 10 plus years trying to become a comic artist. I went to art school. I did comics for publishers in the US, things like Wonderland, Mannequin Robot, and so for a long time I think I sort of didn't do as much political stuff. I was doing more commercial work. I did there's a comic called Chang and Ing that I did for the New Man magazine that was a bit political, but the rest of it was like more commercial. So I think when Charlie Chan came out, it could have been a bit of a surprise. In fact, I've been told that one reason why the NAC grant went through in the first place was that the people there probably didn't expect something like that from me, because they saw me as a person who did comics about robots and superheroes, right? So when it came out, I think it was a bit under the radar, yeah. But I've always been interested in comics about, or often illustration and paintings about politics or things like that. So that's what I've done illustrations since then. I think like the one about Nas, because he was like making a lot of videos about very pro Singapore, and I thought it was a bit over the top. So I did a caricature of him, but it also extends beyond Singapore, right? So I've done caricatures of the Trump administration, like Sarah Huckabee Sanders, right? So I would think that I'm engaged with these things not just locally, but as a concerned citizen of the world, something like that. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Maybe we can go to JJ next.
Oh yeah, thanks Tanya. So I guess, I grew up in Singapore, studied here, so my political education has been always from what we learn in schools and from the mainstream to newspapers. But I guess when I started working, so I travel quite a bit, and I started, when I travel, I actually love to live with the local people, talk to them, live like them, find out how things are like, how the system of running the country was like, and I started reading like Time magazines and other things beyond Singapore. So I felt that there's more to what it is that we are accustomed to. Then I love to write, so I started writing more in the I started writing in the forum newspapers and so on. The first one, in fact, was 1993 when I was a little upset when there was supposed to be a presidential election, but the candidate wasn't quite keen to contest, and even saying that the Ong Ting Chong is better, vote for him. You know, that kind of thing is like. So I was the first to write into the forum pages to say that, hey, you cannot do that. I mean, let's take this more seriously. And then yeah. So after that, I started writing a little more to the newspapers, and because of my work, I also get caught into some of the government policy groups where I was involved in a few. So I guess I was also a bit under the radar, like Sonny. You know, I really was a little feeling a bit uncomfortable about, like, especially the political unevenness in Singapore. I feel that, yeah, I mean, no doubt the PAP has done some good policies in the past to get us to where we are economically, but I feel that there should be more political fairness. I even wrote in 2006 criticizing the upgrading for vote. Mabao Tan replied my letter even. Yeah, but I guess when 2011 came, and I just felt that, well, but at that time I already sold and left my business. I had more time on my hand. I felt that, well, I wasn't so beholden to government contracts and so on. So I just made an approach to Workers' Party, and you can read about it in Journey in Blue, how I was a pretty last-minute addition to the team. Glad I got in and got to experience what I experienced in the last 10 years.
Okay. Jung Si, go ahead.
Cool. Thanks, Tanya. So I first kind of got politically engaged in the year 2000. So I was 14 years old. I was on the school debating team. And in September 2000, the government had decided to start Hong Lim Park. So it was a Speaker's Corner. And just to give you some context of what the political scene was like in the year 2000, at that time there was one opposition constituency represented in Parliament. Social media was not a thing, so it was pre-Facebook. Most people were, if they were politically interested, were talking on internet forums. So this was even pre-social political blogging, pre-Mothership, pre-TOC. So for someone who was curious about current affairs, the Speaker's Corner was interesting and kind of a way to see political discussion in action, right? So I went down and sat through a lot of really bad speeches about a lot of things that were completely and utterly irrelevant. And I thought it was disappointing that this inflection point in our political history was kind of being wasted, right? And I thought, I'm gonna try. Registered for a permit and got up on a stone bench and started talking about democracy, about why I thought it was important, about civic participation. And I was speaking to a group of 80 retirees, right? And obviously now in 2020 things are so different, right? The kind of platform you've got, it's not going to be an actual stone bench on Hong Lim Park, right? And so after that, I started Online Citizen in 2006. Again, there was a point in our political history where social political blogging was a lot more accepted and a lot of people were doing it individually, but there wasn't a group of people or a platform to bring together ideas that were conceptually, fundamentally, and in principle different, right? A different way of seeing how Singapore could be. And so with co-founder Andrew Low and a couple of others, Gerald Giam was one of them in the early days, we started Online Citizen. And the idea behind TOC was not just to write, but also to engage physically. So we did things like hosted political forums for people from different parties to speak directly to Singaporeans. And we also did actually a lot of protests, especially on issues around internet freedom. Fast forward to when I had to suit up as a lawyer. I had to take a step back from TOC around 2011, 2012 and in my practice, I incorporate a lot of the communities and concerns, ideas and ideals that I still have into the work I do. So although I do a lot of the run-of-the-mill commercial stuff, I do find it very important to do public interest litigation, which is litigation that is impactful over and beyond the cases you bring to court. So you're not just speaking to a judge, but hopefully through your case you're speaking to a broader political community.
Okay, thank you. Thanks everyone for sharing. For those who are just tuning in, if you're just joining us, you're currently watching Mothership Open Secrets. In today's roundtable discussion, we have with us 3 Singaporeans: former NCMP Yee Jenn Jong, activist lawyer Choo Cheng-si, and award-winning graphic artist Sonny Liew. They'll be speaking more about their experiences, contributing to Singapore's political scene, and how young Singaporeans can get started on their journey. I'm Tanya, and I will be the moderator for today's session. We'll also be taking questions from our online viewers, so if you have anything you'd like to hear more about from these speakers, please comment in the comment section. If your question is selected, you'll stand a chance to win a signed copy of Jenn Jong's new book titled Journey in Blue. The winners will be contacted via DM later. Okay, now on to our discussion, right guys? So the very first question that I'd like to pose to you guys is, how do you think a young person can begin contributing to the political scene? Because I think for many of us, especially young people, they think that the most straightforward way might be to volunteer with a political party. But actually, I understand that all 3 of you didn't start out this way. So given your slightly different political experiences as well, how do you think young people can contribute in other creative ways? Yeah, maybe we can start with Sunny for this question.
Well, I would guess that there's so many avenues now, right, that it's more a matter of their own inclination. Like if you're artistically inclined, you can make comics, you could make paintings or theater. If you really want to get involved, you can volunteer for a party or just post stuff online. I guess it's the easiest way now. It's like the least friction, right? You just post your thoughts on social media and things like that. So yeah, I think that's what's great about the current situation, right? Is that there is no one way. Like everyone can find their own little niche or their own path. And for me, even myself, I think of my own comics as being just one part of the conversation, right? Because I think you need it to come from all directions, right? Whether it's theater, film, comics, actual political activity. So I think that's how things actually change and move forward. It's through this combined effort, through everyone doing their own thing.
That there's different kinds of niches, so to speak, and how do you think people can find and discover that niche that works for them?
I'm guessing that most young people are on the internet now, and you'll see like TikTok videos or whatever, and you'll find their own mode of expression, right? It's not for me to tell them what works best. I think they will probably be the ones who know best what works for them, lah. Yeah.
JJ?
Yeah, well, for myself, of course, I started by first getting myself to understand more about what is it like, the different systems, because sometimes it's best for us to equip ourselves with more than one view so that we understand perspective from different sides and how things work. Yeah, today we are very fortunate that there are so many channels. You don't have to rely on just writing to forum, which I used to do. You can just make your own TikTok videos. You can, there's so many online channels like Mothership that you can contribute to and so on. So important is that you find a certain passion and cause, then that will be able to last you longer. So, for example, there's quite a lot of talks about environment, or even if you are concerned about migrant workers or even animals and so on. First have a cause, then you see what are the channels you can do to update people, whether through videos or through your writing, or through even exposing certain facts out. Like food bloggers can take on an issue and spotlight about hawker being sort of bullied by some of these bigger. Unfortunately, the social enterprise run hawker centers. So it's first what you want to take out, of course, understand enough of the topic, then start to contribute to it. And of course, joining political parties as volunteer is one of the way as well. Like you rightly pointed out, I didn't start that way. I actually came in quite late into the game, just 2 months before the 2011 election. Yeah. So, but then that was because I felt a bit constrained because my main business was mainly government. Yeah, until I left the business, then I didn't want to like openly come out and take part in the political process. But it doesn't mean that before that I didn't try to effect change, like volunteering in community work or contributing in policy discussions and so on at the government level.
Thank you.
Yeah, so, you know, I think as JJ and Sonny have pointed out, actually, and you've pointed out too, a lot of people don't necessarily think about political parties or the political process on a day-to-day basis. What they do think about and what they do get engaged in are causes, concerns, and values, right? And these are the things that a lot of you would already be talking about and already be engaging in. So that's the first step, and you're probably already doing it if you're sharing stuff on your IG stories, if you're retweeting things about current affairs, if you're talking about what's going on in America and how it relates to Singapore. You're already crossing the first threshold by even asking the question you asked, which is how to get engaged. So that's step one. You need to give a damn, right? And so caring and then communicating that you care, that's the first step, right? The second step, to my mind, is building a community, right? So finding other people who share that interest with you, and just building on that with a group of people that can affirm you and who you can work towards those and advance those causes together with, right? So you build a community of people who care about the environment, who care about gender issues, that care about sexual equality, and then you use that to amplify your voice and your concern, right? So then the third step is coalition building, right? So building from those communities that you've created, how you then network with other groups that share those concerns, or groups with which your concerns may overlap, right? So you can advance those interests kind of intersectionally, right? So environmentalists don't always need to talk to other environmentalists in environmental forums. They talk to members of the political parties from both spectrums. They speak to the LAs of the politicians to try and share their concerns and see if these can be presented in Parliament. And they network, right? So those are the three ways I see things happening, right? And two caveats, okay? The first, like Sonny said, is we're probably not the best people to tell young people these days how to get engaged in that process, because they already are in so many ways that we can only imagine. Like, I have interns who are 16 years old who tell me that in their schools they have LGBT support groups on Discord. Okay, so I had to Google that to find out what that was. And when I was 16, I didn't know I was gay, right? But now they not only know, they deal with it by building communities around their values, and not just their identity, right? Their values, what they care about, and the causes they believe in, right? So the second caveat is, I think anything the three of us can share about engaging in that political process necessarily has to be filtered through the lens of the fact that we are three Chinese men, right? So these are our experiences coming from a particular point of, some would say, privilege, and the barriers to entry in the political process may not necessarily, or in civic engagement, may not necessarily be similar for different people with different lived realities, right?
Actually, thank you so much for raising that point on different groups having different concerns and also drawing similarities between you three. I think that's a wonderful point. And this is the first of hopefully many roundtable dialogues. So I think this is something that we are definitely bearing in mind, for future conversations and how conversations can also be more inclusive. So thanks for bringing that up. I'm sure actually all of us can agree that inclusivity is something that's very important to us, and I'm curious to hear more in terms of the three of you as content creators in your own right. How did the three of you ensure that the content that you produce, right, caters to a wide enough segment of society?
Well, I mean, this question has been raised before. I think in Q&A sessions. I've been even like when the book came out, people asking if it doesn't include like the LGBT perspective or other perspectives. But I guess my own take is that it's something to be aware of. Like, of course, if you're not aware of it, you can't even deal with it, right? But once you're aware of it, it's something you consider and weigh in your own production. But I guess I would lean towards saying that let the people who want to speak up about it speak up for themselves, right? Rather than me as like a Chinese male person trying to speak up for minority groups or other genders. So I think it's more about as a whole creating space for everyone to have a chance to speak up for themselves, rather than trying to encompass every point of view within your work. Yeah.
I don't quite see myself as a content producer. My involvement more is, before I was a politician, it was more like writing, and when I write, it's for causes that I'm interested in or things I want to push. So I wasn't thinking anything about inclusivity. It was just like certain things that I feel ought to be done certain ways, and I'll just write about it. And when I became a parliamentarian, of course, then there is both the party as well as my personal beliefs and compass that will guide us. And as you know, the Workers' Party position is quite known as centre-left, and the party is mostly made up of people who joined with a certain kind of a belief. But of course, we do look at petitions or issues that people bring up, and then parliamentarians may then decide to see what issues they want to take up, maybe follow up with parliamentary questions or even speeches to champion some issues, which I did. I championed certain issues, education. It was more general for everybody, but even some things about environment and so on. So I don't know, the question never came across my mind about inclusivity. It's just like what cause we want to do. And of course, in the party, then of course we want to represent all Singaporeans, and we try to take in views. And the party do give us a certain scope to see what are the issues we want to personally champion.
All right. Perhaps if I rephrase it slightly differently in how you see issues that you want to champion, right? And when you make certain suggestions, perhaps in response to certain problems that you see, how would you go about making these recommendations general enough such that it makes sense overall, but also without being overly populist in that sense?
I see. So usually for myself personally, when I would want to take up an issue, I would first try to understand what may be the objections to it, why is the government not taking it up, or why are they not even aware of it, or things like that. And sometimes it's just pushing out data so that there'll be more discussions by pushing out the data, because I might not have all the answers. But it's interesting that for me personally, I described that also in the book, and how when I take certain causes up, sometimes I even talk to people I know who are in the government side, or maybe people who have left the government service, who are policy makers, to understand why certain things could not be done in that way, right? And then once you know what are the objections, then you can try to find some of the answers to it and try to find the solutions to it. So I mean, I can't say, I just take one example because it's quite hard to generalize. Like, let's say when I wanted a true trained school from primary to secondary, then of course, some people will say, are you crazy? You won't work in Singapore. I mean, of course, you can't cater to everybody. And of course, I'm in the education line, you deal with parents. Some people will say, how can you do away with PSLE? Not possible. So some people will say, yes, do away with it, right? So of course, you can't please everybody. But for me, I just want to have a conversation on that topic to see how we can explore at least some pilot schools to offer that option, because currently in Singapore there's zero option. For me, I do not want my children to go through it. I didn't mind if they didn't go to top secondary schools, but I have no option. I have to go through all the kind of exams and to be sorted out the way that the MOE wanted them to be sorted out. Yeah, so there was no option. So I was just pushing for an option for some people who did not want to be part of this system.
Okay, understand. Thanks so much for sharing your thought process as well. Jung Si, you have anything to share on this?
Not much, I guess, but I guess the way I see the issues I engage with or I care about, I see them kind of as foundational principles or values, right? So, freedom of speech and political plurality. These are very important to me. And of course, in more specific causes, like sexual and gender equality, that's very important. It's also very foundational because these are values that are intersectional. They cut across a lot of different questions of the day that may be topical, but will engage some of these deeper concerns, right? So I try to do work around those areas. I'm a bit more interested in work around those areas because it's foundational. So once you do have an equal political playing field and a diversity of views in Parliament, at least politically speaking, there is a better chance that you will get greater inclusivity also, although that can be taken for granted in areas like race, religion, sexual minorities, and gender equality, as well as concerns that are less mainstream, like the environment or animal rights, which have now kind of come to the center. But at the core of that are the foundational questions, right? How free is your society? How engaged is your citizenry? How equally do you treat people, and how inclusive are we as a country, right? And of course, I can't speak to certain lived experiences because of who I am and where I've come from, but I do hope in trying to address those fundamental or foundational issues, in trying to expand that space. I also hold space for other people who can speak to those concerns and realities that are not mine.
Right. And okay, so you've also mentioned how different people have different causes, or sometimes when they notice certain inequalities, they feel compelled to do something about it. So we actually have one question from our audience asking how we can ensure that young people with a very strong sense of justice, right, can also become more well-informed and more holistic in the way that they look at issues or approach certain matters. What recommendations would you have for these young people?
I mean, the idea I think that has come through a lot through all the discussions, that there's a need for, I think, rigor in your your causes. I think that for the early speeches you went to at Hong Kong, the problem with them was that they were like passionate maybe, but they weren't well researched, for example. Right? And I think that's probably the base issue that you can address, which is actually to find out more about what you're passionate about, and make sure that, like he said, to understand what the other side or the people that you're trying to challenge are really thinking, so that you're not just I guess you're not just arguing to sort of preaching to the choir, right? People are on your side. You're trying to understand a wide range of perspectives and trying to get the facts right. I think even with this book, I remember when I was doing the book, I would ask friends about their views of politics, and some of them would give me examples of things that they thought were going wrong. And I remember asking Zheng Xi a question about a certain law that my friend was convinced was sort of had underlying motives that were not so upfront, right? And Zheng Xi told me that no, actually it's just something that's happening all around the world. It's not really an issue. And then I went back and asked my friend about it, and he was like, yeah, I guess I was. So I think when we engage with this political stuff, a lot of times we have our views and opinions and our gut instincts, right? And I think they might not always be the correct ones, right? They just be our initial reaction. So it's important to go out and find out more, to learn more, and then I can push for it afterwards, right? Or during the process to just be more informed. I think that's actually the key to the question that I was often asked about free speech in Singapore, right? Is it important to have free speech? I would say yes, but in our context, I think it's also very important to have responsible free speech, and that's being rigorous about your research and your understanding of the topic is part of that responsibility.
Yeah, I think I would echo that too. And I think today there's a lot more easier to be able to find information, but it's also very easy to find misinformation. And I mean, you see the case in the US about people fighting for causes that sometimes in my opinion, I felt that they are being misled, but unfortunately, they felt so passionate about it. So I think it's good to be passionate, but sometimes you also be grounded in proper facts and research. So it's always good that while we are passionate, read up the other side of it, and then so that you have a balanced view, and also have a community of people, because there's no point to be just doing it by yourself. You really need to build up like-minded people, and then you can share information with one another. Yeah, and I think I've seen young people being able to even form groups, do things together. It could even be as simple things as sometimes I go to the beach, and my house is near the East Coast beach, and then I've seen a group of young people from universities or polys, all they going there, cleaning up beach and all that. They just do it as a regular thing that they want to do, because they just want to be part of this clean up environment thing. So it's finding some things and finding a community of people with you that shares certain passion to do things together.
Yeah, so again, this is one of these things that people I know who are in university or have just graduated, they are teaching me about how the future can look, right? So years ago, a group of my interns and their friends at university started a group based in NUS called CAPE, structured around educating members of the public about the political process, about political education, which is so foundational, right? And not just doing it in a discussion or panel format, but also creating content in the way of infographics and resource material for people to read and to understand, right? And then inviting different people from different political parties to speak to university students and members of the public, and to tell them how, and just to educate the public on how the political process works. And that is kind of, it's like supposed to be the air we breathe and the water we drink in a functioning democracy, but every 5 years when elections come around, that process of quite basic political education has, suddenly begins again. And then you have people asking you, is the vote secret, for instance? And something that's so obvious to so many of us that we speak to is not for a lot of other segments of the population, right? The NCMP scheme, what is it? How does it work, right? Every 5 years when G comes around, people scratch their head, and then you have all this heated rhetoric about the strategic implications of NCMPs, all within a 9-day cycle. So we can never take the political education for granted, right? It's a process that can't just happen every 5 years. It's something that everyone needs to continuously share about and be engaged in. Yeah.
Thanks for that. And actually, I'm also curious to find out a little bit more from you in terms of, because you spoke a lot about political education, and every individual goes through their own journey, right? Of their own political education journey. So on Instagram, there was actually a question directed at you on if there was ever a time in your life where you would oppose everything the government did.
Was there ever a time in my life where I opposed everything the government did? I think when I first embarked on that political awakening when I was 14, I was quite tunnel visioned in everything that I thought Singapore could do better in, right? And having pushed back on a lot of the government's policies over the years, especially when it came to things like internet freedom, freedom of speech. Some of those original concerns, they're all still there, right? But it's not a problem with the government necessarily as it is with a system of thought and a way of thinking, right? So to the extent that that's still there and those views are still held by anyone on either side of the divide, I find that problematic, right? So it's not about government or not government, it's are these good ideas or are these bad ideas? And the ideas that I thought were bad ideas when I was 14, I more or less still think they're bad ideas, and I'm still in my own way trying to roll them back. And the ones that I think are good ideas, I've over the years come to see different ways of advancing those interests that may not involve having to fight pitch battles all the time.
I see, right. And okay, so there is also another Instagram question, which I think is quite a natural follow-up to this, but this question is open to all three of you. And the question is, were you ever worried that your political involvement would land you in jail or cause you to lose your job? So there was another specific question directed at Jenn Jong on whether it's tough being a politician and maybe like the hardest part about it. So I think that kind of links a little bit to anxieties over political involvement perhaps, yeah. So if you could address these two questions together, I think that might be a bit helpful for the person asking these questions as well.
Actually, for me, I don't know. I wasn't that worried, but I think my wife and my dad were the most worried. Was shared in my book how my entry to the Workers' Party was nearly stopped twice. First, my wife didn't consent and had to go about a pretty creative way to try to get her mother to get to agree. And then later my dad objected, by which time was a bit late because I was already introduced, I was out there in the media, I was really campaigning. So I told him, no, I'll be very, very careful, you know. But I mean, I've gone through 10 years. Of course, what's the toughest thing? I guess I would say largely my journey has been quite fulfilling. At least it depends on what you want in life. Of course, we know that it's always very tough to go against the incumbent who is so strong. And but I think, of course, the most difficult thing probably didn't happen to me. Like it happened to those people who were elected MP and having to run the town councils and all that, and that's my the thing that still upsets me is the way that this is being done. The political process need to be fairer, because when people elected and a new party has come in, then the handover must be smooth. There should be no banana skin, no poison pills. I still believe strongly that that has to be the way. I think there's improvement now. Opposition has become more mainstream. And one of the things that I wanted to do, and which is basically also the purpose of the book, besides political education, having people to understand more about what life is like in the opposition side, is also to have this conversation about what we want opposition to do in Singapore. Because there's been this narrative painted for so many years that we are only good for one A team, and the opposition is bad, they're out to destroy Singapore and so on. I'm trying to say that no, it's not, and it's, like it or not, you'll be mainstream now. There are nearly 10 elected member of parliament. Of course, we would like to have more in future. So then how can we play this process? So then it has to be a more responsible process on both sides of it, right? But otherwise, for me, I think I went through that 10 years pretty much okay. Of course, there was some tougher part, but it didn't quite happen to me. I mean, the tougher parts will happen to some of the other members in our team.
Okay.
I guess in a way, a similar experience in terms of not so much having the fear come from an internal source, as from people around you, right? Your family, your loved ones. They will say, "Why are you doing this?" Like they ask you, "Are you sure you want to do this?" Right? And they get worried that I'll get in trouble. And I think that, so it's more of like osmosis. Their fear becomes my fear rather than my fear coming from my own feelings. And to an extent, I guess that's because Singapore, for all its what flaws there are, is not really an authoritarian state the way that Saudi Arabia or other countries are. So I don't think someone here in Singapore like myself exhibits the same kind of bravery or courage that someone in Saudi Arabia does when they speak up against the authorities, right? So we are, I think, still very much law-based society, right? So the government does, try to do the right thing. I think what we try to do is try to point out the issues that we see that they might not see from their perspective, right? So one common line that I think goes through a lot of activist circles is that good doesn't mean it can't be better, right? So it's not because we think Singapore is bad. Obviously, it's not it's a great place to live in. It's just that we think that there's certain things that can be improved, that maybe the authorities within their own ideological bubble might not see, right? So we are out there trying to give a different perspective, I think.
So in 2015, the government sued the online citizen using the Protection from Harassment Act. And even though by that time I was pretty much uninvolved, my name was still on the register, so I was one of the parties that was also sued by the Ministry of Defence. And that was obviously frightening. We lost the case at first instance at the District Court, and we appealed it to the High Court, and we won. And then after that, the government appealed it to the Court of Appeal, and that was quite nerve-wracking because the final judgment vindicated us, so we won again, but it was a split decision, so it was a 2-1 decision. So it was 2.5 years of worrying about whether or not I would get this court order against me for something that I thought was relatively frivolous. And that was trying, it was difficult. And I guess that kind of underscores the point that if you do want to have a certain level of involvement with the political process, you need to have certain instincts for when to fight and when to take flight, right? But that's life. That's life. You're going to face that in business, you're going to face that in the workplace, you're going to face that in your personal life. So I personally take these things as they come. But again, I fully acknowledge that if this is the kind of concerns or neuroses that I may have, coming from a lawyer that runs his own law firm and that has a relatively strong community of support around me, with all that privilege, if I'm worried and I'm concerned, it's not easy for a lot of people to fully put themselves in the political process, right? That's why I've got utmost respect for people like JJ who have really put themselves out for continuous public scrutiny, not just every time they run, but in between election cycles too. It's always living under the microscope. That's remarkable.
Thanks for sharing so candidly. I mean, like, these are all quite personal experiences, and you've shared, all of you actually shared quite a bit about your lives and all. Okay, so I think we only have time for one more question from the Facebook audience. So I will just ask a question on how after GE 2020, right? So more youths, and okay, I think it's not just after GE 2020, but in general, as our citizenry evolves, youths are becoming more politically aware. Yeah. So earlier, JJ, you mentioned about how now there's more information, more access to information on social media, on various platforms because of the just sheer volume of access nowadays. And also earlier, you mentioned about a little bit on how the future will look probably slightly different, because I mean 20 years ago is slightly different world from the world that we know today. So given that the youths are becoming more politically aware as well, how do you think that this will affect our political scene and outcomes 10 or 20 years down the road? Are there any changes that you foresee or maybe even hope to see in Singapore? You want to start? He sounds like yes. Something. Yeah.
So I think it's a question about probably we interpreted it as how our political landscape change with people becoming more aware or interested. I think Sengkang is a quite interesting case study because we have a very young team there against 3 political office bearers, and with a very young population in Sengkang. So, and you can see that they are more open to change. So I guess, which is why I feel that, of course, it took the Workers' Party and it took opposition a while to come to this stage where we're trying to do away with this thing that's been painted about oppositions, that we are no good, we have no policies, we have no idea, and so on. That there are no good people joining, and I think people can see for themselves that the people joining the I can't say for all, but at least I'll say for what I know. By the way, I don't speak for the party for this, but from what I see is that we have more and more people with good professions, education, joining the Workers' Party, and I think we are able to match the PAP in many ways in that. So I think if that happens, and then people will be more willing to accept the opposition coming in to first run the constituency, and who knows, I mean 10-15 years is quite a long time, especially the other side is undergoing their leadership transitions. We do not know how that will happen and what shape they will take. But no political party in history has ever lasted forever. So there might come to a time that there might be a change. We don't know when. I see that we'll just put up the as best a candidate as slate as we can to run it in as responsible a way. And I think it's good that people are being more aware and more willing to read up and more willing to give the opportunity to the opposition. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I would see that opposition has become sort of mainstream in some ways. Whether it's going to be like just kept to like 10-15% or you will go beyond that, we don't know, because it's always it's a rapidly evolving situation.
Okay.
I suppose, the problem with trying to predict the future is that most of us turn out to be wrong, right? I think this kind of punditry is very fraught. I guess my perspective is that Singapore remains a small country, small island within the whole global landscape, right? So a lot of what happens here is going to be determined by what China and US end up doing, which a lot of people have written about it, thought about it, but it's really unclear how the larger geopolitical landscape will turn out in the next 5-10 years. And Singapore is just going to react to that, I think, more than, because we really are a really small country despite our high GDP and everything else. I'm guessing that the more important point is that whether because of this uncertainty and change, people think that we should just lean back on the PAP and believe that they're the only ones who can lead the country through this turbulent waters. And I believe what JJ is saying, that over the last 5-10 years, I think people have come to see that opposition parties can also be part of that conversation without being disruptive, right? It really can be a valuable contribution to Singapore's future, and that includes also activists and what we call naysayers. I think all of us have, I think, a role to play in the conversation that we were having about what Singapore leans towards, even as the wider world is changing. But yeah, I mean, to predict what Singapore will be like in 5-10 years, I think that's very, very tricky.
Yeah.
I can tell you what I see now and what I've experienced. And that is the rate of generational change. The half-life of that is getting shorter and shorter and shorter, especially in the way people consume and share information. So it took us some time before people started using Facebook politically, right? And then there was the gap between that and Instagram take-up, right? But a lot of people these days, especially young people who will be voting for the first time in the next GE, they're on TikTok. And a lot of the people on TikTok will still not be eligible to vote in 5 years, actually. So a lot of people use TikTok, they're 12 to 16, right? And the rate of change of technological take-up before the new innovation or the new social media platforms inset and get used, that's going to shorten. That half-life is going to shorten, right? What that means is people are getting plugged in to the broader happenings in the world much earlier, not just politically, but just being connected to what's happening around the world. So for instance, I know dozens of university students who open brokerage accounts and who trade. And that was not something that used to happen when I was in school. But that's something that has happened because of Reddit, because of Discord, and because of the way people consume information, right? So what that means for anyone in that generation is that the present is already yours, the future most certainly will be, right? It definitely will be, and you see that being reflected in the political process. The WP fielding an elected MP now who's 27 years old. The PAP also with very young candidates. Nadia Samdin is 30 years old, right? And a lot of the concerns that young people or that are associated with younger generation, care for the environment, animal rights, gender equality, these are now front and center of the political discourse. So if you're watching this and you're interested in how the future plays out, you need to know that you've got so much power in your hands now, because the politicians react to you in a way that's very different from the way they reacted to us in an age where information was much more controlled and much less diffuse. Now, how you want to use it, it's up to you, but one way of doing it is entering the political process, whether it's on the PAP or the WP side, because if good people don't enter the arena, then opportunists will, and if that happens, then the political process will fall into disrepute. And that's something that I hope does not happen. And it can only be avoided if we continue to remain engaged.
Sorry, I'm wondering if that assumes sort of a current trajectory, right? That we are adopting a mostly free approach to the internet, which is what like the Western US model is, right? Because when China first started trying to control the internet, Clinton famously said it's like trying to nail jello to a wall. But in the end, they managed to do it, right? So that's why I think that the wider geopolitical events, like if China does demonstrate that they can grow economically and become a superpower through their current state of control, that will provide Singapore. It's almost like the reverse reaction, because China learned from Singapore some of its political control mechanisms, and we might relearn from them what to do. So I don't think we can assume that the current freedom we enjoy on the internet through TikTok, Instagram is going to be still there in 5-10 years. It's something that we shouldn't assume. We still have to fight for it as well.
Of course, yes.
I hope we don't come to a stage that, even what we want to consume, that will become so controlled, like in some other countries.
Yeah. I mean, it feels unlikely, right? But at the same time,
I think a bit difficult in a situation. I think the pushback will be very hard. I mean, of course, with POFMA and a few other things, they try to push certain boundaries, but I think people are also pushing back. And Singapore being quite open economy and being a smaller place, I don't hope they will be able to control it to the level that some other countries are controlling the consumption of information. But I also want that people, when they consume information, do be open to read on the other side as well, because there's a lot of misinformation as well, and you don't want to be championing a cause based on misinformation.
I'm talking about QAnon, right? Basically.
Yeah, and other stuff, like,
Okay, thank you. One very, very final and quick question. If you had to close today's roundtable with just one word for young Singaporeans, just one word, please don't cheat. What would it be? Just one word. Think about it for a while.
I think for me it would be interested.
Just
two words.
Interested.
Interested, okay.
Maybe I can say interesting, like make sure that what you're doing is
interesting.
Engaging, especially if you're a content creator, you have to like find new ways to express yourself, to communicate your ideas. Yeah.
Okay. Your one word.
You. That the future is yours, and you do you.
Okay, thank you so much to all three panelists for joining us at today's roundtable discussion, for sharing so candidly. I think we've all learned something new about each other today, hopefully at least. I hope our viewers are inspired to think about their own journey of political education, to discover what moves their spirit, and hopefully to contribute more meaningfully to the political process, regardless of background or stage of life. So to the three of you, we wish all of you the very best in your political journey ahead. To the audience, thank you for tuning in to Mothership Open Secrets, and for submitting your questions as well. We hope to have more of such discussions in future. If you have any suggestions on what you would like us to explore more in the future, please comment in the comment section, and we look forward to seeing all of you again. Thank you.
Thanks, Tanya.
Bye-bye.